Welcome to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. I'm Joe. I'm joined again with Mell. Mell, today we're going to be talking about asking better questions. Quality of your questions influences the quality of your life because you will get better responses, you'll learn more, and we're talking family and kids, you'll learn much more about your children.
Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
This is a 10-minute Tuesday episode, so we don't have as much banter at the beginning, although I am enjoying this Angry Birds pillow on my lap. I get the midday chills sometimes, and I get very envious of the old folks who can get away with like blanket on the lap life. Like they always have a blanket on their lap.
Should have just fully committed and gone blanket.
I'm not sure if I'm ready.
Okay.
I think about it, and I am envious. So like a couple blankets, like what's those knitted ones called?
Crocheted.
Is that what they're called? Crocheted blankets? I'd go for one of those.
Oh, an Afghan?
Afghan, yeah. I could just fold that up on my lap and I'm definitely going to be a blanket person as I get older. But today I'm going to be a pillow person, just slightly warming up one thigh.
I know what my Christmas present for you is going to be now.
Blanket for my wheelchair.
Oh, no.
All right, let's talk about asking better questions. And the reason why we want to ask better questions and have an episode on this is that when we're busy, we do check the box questions too often as parents. And I say we as in all of us. And the check the box question would be something like, how was your day? They'll say good. And in your mind, you've checked the box. I asked them how their day was. But it really wasn't much of a question, and it wasn't much of a conversation. You're just hoping to get to the next part of your day. And so we want to pump the brakes, slow down the pace, and learn how to ask better questions. We'll have plenty of examples in this episode.
And the question of how was your day, I think I read an article about this years ago between a husband and a wife, where the wife was home all day with the kids. Husband would come home and say, how was your day? And honestly, she didn't know how to answer that because parts of the day were great, parts of the day were terrible. So it's like, are you asking for an average of how your day was? Or usually when I would ask my son after school that question, I pretty much get how the end of his day was. If last period didn't go well, the day wasn't great. But then you miss out on the entire other aspect of the day. So that's just something that came to mind where we need to be more specific with what we ask.
I promised I wouldn't get ranting on this one because it's a 10-minute Tuesday, but you just mentioned something that got me thinking.
Go for it. I love your rants.
The how your day question is, I want to caution us all about being that, another day kind of person. Grinding away.
Back to the grind.
Yeah, it's it sets you up for mindset. Your mindset just sets you up for failure when you're just like, oh, thank goodness it's Friday. Oh, another Monday. Like you're Garfield in the comics. I got a bad case of Mondays. Like they didn't ask the question to get some dumpy response. But let's go back to the household.
It's a good point, though.
He made a good point about between this husband and wife questions, parents and kids questions, kids to parents questions. This is all part of the family structure. So the first thing I want to caution against is just try and check the box with, hey, I asked the question. The second thing I want to talk about is being intentional with what you want to learn when you ask the question. Some questions should get to know who they're hanging out with. We have a full episode on you're the type of person you hang out with, type of people. But how do you know? How do you know who the kids are hanging out with? So an example question would be, who are you sitting with at lunch? Because that is their choice time. You could ask them who's on their island in school if they have that, but who are you sitting with at lunch? What do you talk about at lunch would be a good follow-up question. Another follow-up question would be, what do they talk about? And so learning who they're hanging out with by asking more than one question.
Or even at your table at lunch, who had the most interesting food? Because for some kids, talking about what was talked about might be a little bit too much initially. So you can talk about what kind of food was there. Logan used to be good at trading kids. He'd come home with like a bag of chips. I'm like, where did you get that? Oh, I traded this for it. But that is interesting because first of all, I'm learning something about my child and I'm learning who he's sitting with and what they're eating. So that's really fun to ask questions, even about the food, not necessarily even the conversation, although that could be a great follow-up question.
That's great. So ask questions that get you to understand who they're hanging out with. Mel, do you have anything on that specific topic?
Well, we gave the lunch example. Another great one to ask about is recess, because a lot of times things will happen at the playground. I mean, like our son loves to play soccer. We hear a lot about the kind of drama that goes down between people on the soccer team, and asking about who you're playing with. Who are you playing with at recess? Maybe they're not playing with anyone. Maybe they're by themselves, and you'll get some feedback that way, or what they're choosing to do with their time. At our son's middle school, they play chess sometimes. He'll come home with his lunch hasn't even been touched. You know, what's up with that? What were you doing? And sometimes I might assume, oh, he must have just bought lunch and not eaten mine. But it was because he was playing chess. He was choosing to do something else with his time. So I learned that interesting information, and not just to go off of my assumptions.
Question style number 2. We started with an easy one. This is more elevated, and not enough parents and people ask questions like this. So the question's purpose is to take them, the person you're asking the question to, out of their mind, because sometimes when you're in your own thoughts, you only see it through that one lens. A way of doing this is saying, if I were to ask your teacher, what do you think she would say about how your day was? And so they have to sit in a different person's mind and then explain how their day was. It is actually simpler for them to answer like that, because they can then think through a different perspective and get over themselves. But it is a good way to practice that. We all need practice like that.
For example, if they had a tough time that day, sometimes the emotions are too strong and it's hard to talk about. So when you ask them a question through someone else's perspective, you'll much more likely you'll get an answer. And a caveat to this, with little kids, like we have one in preschool, he always brings a little stuffed animal to school with him. So a great way to ask him questions is, he's got a little stuffed animal bear called Caramel. You know, what did Caramel learn at school today? Who did Caramel sit with at lunch? You know, so a lot of times with little kids, you'll get more information by asking through a toy or the teacher. But try it with a toy. It's really interesting what they'll bring up.
That's a great point. And I think it is good practice. It is a go-to question that we didn't ask. It's something that comes from business. In the interview world, one of the better questions to ask is, they have references on their resume, is, if I call this reference, what do you think he or she would say your biggest strength is? So it's a different way of asking that normal question. What's your biggest strength? What's your biggest weakness? But you say, if I were to call this person, what do you think they would tell me is one thing you need to work on? And of course you could call and ask that question, and they know you could call and ask that question, but they would say, maybe they would view me as more shy because I did this and that. And that it's almost easier for them, because you're taking down their personal view of that and putting it into somebody else's hands.
Another thing that we like to do is use numbers. So what are 2 things you learned today, or what are 2 things that made you laugh today? And sometimes it just gets them to think a little more deeply, because sometimes when you're asked a question, you might have a thought right away. But okay, you told me 1, now think a little bit more, and they might end up giving you something a little bit deeper that you can follow up on.
Yep, moving on to the next one, number 3, is numbers, like Mel's talking about. You got to throw a number in there so we stay structured here on these. And you are absolutely right. Give them a number, and this again comes from the business world, but you can do, hey, what was 3 good things about your day? What was 1 thing that you wish went different? What was 1 thing you heard other people talk about? What are 2 things that made you smile today? And so it gives them a target versus an open-ended question.
And I'll just repeat before you went to number 3. Sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. Is that it helps them to think beyond just what comes up easily. When we do some gratitude at the table, one of our kids will always say he's thankful for the food in front of him. We want him to think beyond this particular moment and this particular food and table. We want you to think about your day and give us something that happened several hours ago, not right now. So it just gives a little bit more depth of thought.
Very good. Do you have another one from your list, or do you want me to get us through the last one after mine?
Well, I was saying be specific, but I think that really falls on the follow-up questions and just asking a stronger question than how was your day. So I think we kind of covered be specific, but I'm not sure if we said that particular word.
My 4th one is going to be, understand when you're in an emotional situation, ask a counterintuitive question, and then acknowledge that you'll get to the emotional part that they want to talk about. For example, if they come in looking upset, you can say, I can see you're upset. However, let's sit down for a second and let's anchor this conversation in gratitude, which is a family practice for us, so maybe it's a little bit easier. Say, we will get to what went wrong. What are 2 things that went right today? And it puts a positive focus before you get to the negative thing, because it's easy to spiral into negativity. An example would be my son's soccer game. Our middle child did not go so well this past weekend. Good first half, then it went poorly. Kid even kicked one off his shin and went in like an own goal, and he's clearly frustrated. And when we got back to the truck, I said, hey, what are 2 things you learned during today's game? Because he wanted to get right into how bad it was, and this is bad, and this is bad. And he identified 2 things that were really positive. One kid that had stepped up who hadn't before, and they got to play against a better team and see what good passing looked like. And then they got into, this didn't go well. It is a more complete conversation than just seeing the one side of negativity or drama that they want to get to. And yes, you acknowledge, hey, we're going to get to that. That's going to come up. But if you start with a positive focus, it can change the whole conversation.
Another example could be if you know as a parent what classes your child tends to enjoy. So our oldest son took a class on construction last semester. So if I could tell he was having a rough day, I might ask him about that class, because I'm pretty much 99% sure that class went well. So we talk about his day, but we have the aspects that went well, and then we also address what might have not been so what might have not gone so well.
One last footnote before we land the plane on the short episode is that it is good to close the loop when you ask questions. An example, I asked my son, hey, what's 2 things that made you smile today? And he identified his social studies teacher who greets him in the morning, and that helps him start the day off with a positive note. Okay, good. You have that knowledge. Now, what are you going to do with that as a parent? Well, I sent him an email, and the principal an email complimenting him, because you want to reinforce these positive behaviors and give credit where credit's due and show gratitude. So I emailed his teacher and I emailed the principal to say, hey, my child came home and we had this conversation at dinner. I asked him this question and he identified you as something positive in his day, and I want to thank you for that. And that's how you start building deeper relationships. And yes, we need to have relationships at school to know what's going on. Yes, we need to have relationships with coaches and other kids' parents. And a great way to do it is to reinforce positive behavior through getting it out of your child with questions and then celebrating them by following up. So try to close the loop on some of these things. It's a next level relationship builder for you and your family.
And my last thought is to ask questions with expectation, that you're going to expect to get an interesting answer, that you expect to learn something new about your kid. And oftentimes when we ask really good questions, we end up hearing how our kids are embodying our values. So ask questions with expectation that it's going to enrich your family.
Move beyond checking the box when you ask questions. This will be a big difference in your day, and you can ask far fewer but get much better responses and much deeper communication. If you enjoyed this short episode, please give it a like. This podcast is taking off because you have been liking and sharing it with your friends. Thank you so much. Please keep it up. We really appreciate it. And you can download free the Strong Family Path at strongfamilyproject.com. We have some gifts for you over there, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode.